Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coaching and Consulting Insight series on the Success Insight podcast. This series introduces you to coaches and consultants who work with leaders, teams, entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals to create their best lives and achieve and perform at their peak performance and full potential. Our guest today is Po Lindvall. Po is an executive master coach, a doctoral researcher, a leadership coach, and a team coach. He is also a sports psychologist and mental health coach for several European national teams, and he is the author of several books and scientific articles. Po, it's a pleasure to have you on the Coaching and Consulting Insight series. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. You and I interacted on LinkedIn just recently, but I don't know if you recall, I actually met you, and you and I are first degree connections, but I actually met you, I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago at a conference, the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, their EMCC, at their annual conference in, I believe it was Turkey, a wonderful place. And I think the problem with LinkedIn, we connect with people and then we don't interact with them after. And I always coach my clients, you have to stay in touch. You have to plant the seed and you have to nurture it. And so my nurturing is long overdue because I think this past week, I had seen you writing some articles and posting about team coaching. I was just very interested in it because team coaching and the necessity for it are very much a part of the coaching work I do with leaders. And I would love if you could share, given your very extensive background and expertise, a little bit about your background, where you're at today in terms of your research and your coaching work to help develop a coach approach to teams and leadership and leading teams.
Yes, well, I remember it first to go back to Turkey. I remember the conference well, but I think it actually must have been longer back. It must be 2014 or something like that.
Could be something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
But I think I was president of research for EMCC Global at the time.
Okay.
But that was an annual conference, so we had some meetings in connection with it. But when we were doing the research conferences, I was the host for those conferences for 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was a great time. Traveled a lot around Europe during those years.
I'm a little envious because I'm here in the U.S. I mean, I travel a lot in the U.S., but I would love to get back to Europe. But that's the fringe benefit of living there.
Yeah. Well, a little bit about my background, and you mentioned some things. I was very much inspired from the start by a Canadian sports psychologist named Terry Orlick. He actually passed just a couple of years back because he was in Sweden a lot in the early 1990s when we had some conferences here. And we went to Ottawa for a conference, Salt Lake City for another conference. It's not always that psychologists have a coaching approach to how they work, but he did. So we did an international program for 2 years where we met for summer school and did some work during the winters. And as he had that approach, actually, when we were getting our certifications afterwards, there was a discussion in the group because we were actually asked, what do you want the title of the certificate to be? And we were struggling with coaching or counseling. And I thought coaching was a much better fitting title, but the rest of the group hadn't really gotten that. And so it became counselor. And I protested against it since then because the Swedish National Sports Association, they still use that word. And I think then they are missing out very much because for me, it's been natural to create participation and dialogue since the start of my work. And actually, since I was running a sports school at the time, and to adding the sports psych bits into the training, we actually started to win both national, European, and world titles, both amateur and pro titles. So as I was running one of the biggest and most successful schools at the time in that kind of sport, I also had lots of business people training.
Mhm.
And actually already some 10 years before that, I was approached by two businessmen who wanted to do some, mental toughness training through physical training.
Mm.
And they asked me, why don't you work more with this businessman? And I said, I need to know some more before, because that was too early.
Okay.
But 10 years after, then and that was a really good band in the time. I don't know if you understand what I'm referring to, the rock band 10 years after.
Now help me understand that.
No, it's actually something I'm listening to at the moment. It's an old rock, US rock and roll band called 10 years after.
Oh, okay. That went right
But
above
never
my
mind.
head, but okay.
Uh,
It's
10 years
interesting.
later,
A seed gets planted, we water it, we look after it, and, we wonder why it's not sprouting. It's just not the right time. But then 10 years later, it's like, it all makes sense.
yeah,
What I was interested, when you were talking about the naming and the discussion around the naming the program, and because when I think of psychologists, I think of counselors, I think of a power dynamic. You're As a counselor, we're the all-knowing. We have the
yeah,
skills, the expertise. The the client, the patient needs help. The individual you're working with, could be a tennis pro, a golf pro, a student, they need help. Whereas with the coaching, it's conversation. And there's not that power dynamic. It's co-creating, collaborating. And I
yeah.
appreciate that.
But there's something here in the coaching community that I would call a myth. Yeah, because it's said that as coaches, we only need to learn the methodology of coaching, and then we can coach anybody. And I disagree very much with that assumption,
Okay.
because working with athletes, when I coach them, how would I ever know what to ask them and what follow-up question to ask if I didn't understand fully what they were saying? And what I'm talking about here is how I interpret evidence-based coaching.
Okay.
If you don't have the evidence, you just guess, and okay, you have your experience. But actually, if your experience is not the same as the person that you're coaching, and there's another perspective that you don't understand, then you might not ask a question that's really helpful at that time. And if you have read the wrong self-help books, and there are many of those, you might even base your coaching on something that could be harmful. And I think this is really important because, I mean, if you're an architect or a medical doctor or whatever, and you construct a bridge, you really have to know your mathematics, your science. But when you design it, you have to have the artistic side of it, the knowing, the tacit knowing, the fingerspitzgefühl, or what you want to call it. And you need to combine those.
Mhm.
So the experience and that part, the artistic part of coaching is important. But if you base what you're doing on the wrong dreamt up knowledge, then you might actually harm. And I
So,
think that's really important.
so what is the impact then to this profession of coaching when, I people work with a coach, we go through a coach training program, and we learn mine was evidence-based as well. And we learn that we are taught, as you just said, perhaps in, pause for consideration, we should be able to coach anybody, meet them where they're at. Now, if you're coaching or there's somebody you're training or you're coaching through coach training, is there a thought that if the client is a doctor or an attorney or a financial professional, the best coach for them is somebody who has experience in that industry?
It depends on what they are coaching them on,
Okay.
because as I'm a leadership coach or
Mhm,
executive coach, I
mhm,
only coach people around issues related to that.
mhm.
So I can very well coach a medical doctor, but not around medicine, because I
Of
well, I
course.
know something about medicine. I know
Right,
what headache pill to take,
right.
uh, but if I'm approached by a medical doctor uh, who is a manager for a department or in a hospital or whatever, then the issues we'll talk about is leadership and management issues. And if I don't know those issues, I will not be the best possible coach for that leader or manager.
Okay. So you are still providing coach training through, through your program. How does the training then prepare your students to go out and be successful working and having an impact inside organizations? Is because you're not just getting somebody who has a medical background or an attorney, a legal background, financial background, instruction. You're getting I would imagine you're getting a cross section of students, or are you focusing on specific industries at a time in the training that you are delivering?
No, of course, it's a mix of industries, and I've been doing this since, you know, well, in some ways, I've done it for more than 30 years.
Right.
Um, and I don't know which industry I haven't done it in. But the thing is, this program is a leadership training, leadership development training program. And that's the reason why I divide it into that. Yeah. So they're not even getting training in management. They're only getting training in leader behaviors and leadership.
Okay.
Because if you're a medical doctor and you're a manager, you have two roles.
Right.
One is the medical doctor and one is the leader, or in worst case, the boss. So we're focusing on that. And then, because when we start the training, there are coaching exercises, of course. But really soon, the exercises turn into real coaching. They coach each other on different subjects.
Mhm.
And these can be related to the profession in some way, but more of the organization. And most of them, if they're all leaders, they have experience and knowledge about how an organization works. So besides because the program is filled of reading different subjects, all of it evidence-based. Even if we talk about effective meetings, I refer to some sources on research on that.
Mhm.
And at the same time, this is a semi-structured program. So we have some reading and make some very short lectures on the subjects. And then we have a dialogue around, okay, how can we actually use this in coaching? And then comes the exercise for the actual coaching of each other. So if very often the program is a management team,
Right.
the team. So then they practice team coaching on each other. And after the second or third time, it's not practice anymore. It's actual team coaching that's going on. So the program is very, you might call it hybrid. It's a training program, but it's also coaching. But when the participants are from different organizations, then we're doing group coaching. And I know when I was vice president of research in EMCC, I asked a long time ago, why don't we count team coaching hours? And now we have team coaching certifications.
Right.
And now I'm asking, why don't we count group coaching hours? Because that's also a thing. And I've done that since the 1990s. And a mix of all this. And now, because of that, the program is a mix of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they start practicing individual coaching in triads. Then we do some team coaching exercises when we're into the third model. And if it's an open program, it becomes a group coaching exercise where they actually prepare to do team coaching when they come back to the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really mixing it all up because they're all connected. The dynamics between individual coaching, group, and team coaching are different. As one of my supervisors in research, Annette Filler-Travis, together with Professor Jonathan Passmore, wrote some years back, you can do both. The most thing that differs most is the dynamics. And of course, you might need to have another package of knowledge in the background when you do team coaching than when you do individual coaching. Maybe we could say that we go from psychology to social psychology or sociology as a background.
Mm-hmm. Would you, if perhaps take a step back too, because we've used this term a couple times, evidence-based coaching. What if you could share that with our audience? What's your definition and application, and why this is so valuable within our profession as coaching? What is evidence-based?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting because Anthony Grant also passed away recently, wrote a really interesting book called Evidence-Based Coaching.
That was in my coach training way back in when I'm not even going to give the year, but that was a wonderful book.
Yeah, it still is, and I buy into his definition because, and also, I mean, evidence-based comes from the medical profession, but there are three parts. Base your interventions on best available research or knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Add your own experience and tacit knowing, and take in the medical profession, take in the experience and knowledge the patient have of their own body and illness, and in the coaching, it will be the same, and that's what we're doing in coaching. But many miss that knowledge part, the evidence-based research and best available knowledge there is. So actually, sometimes when I do individual coaching, a subject might come up and I do something and we talk about and I ask questions, but afterwards, at times, I feel like, oh, that was a really interesting subject. I need to look a little bit deeper into that and bring it up again the next time. Or even in the call, say that this is really interesting, but there's much more behind this that we need to look a bit further into. I will do that and I will send you some reading. And then together we dig into it the next time we meet. And I think that's also something, and that's something I do, and I do in the program. I share reading of research. So they get access to the knowledge, and then together we have a dialogue and trying to understand it. And that's not advice. It's just sharing and reflecting and using something more than our own heads in the coaching experience. And I think that's something that can lift coaching quite a lot sometimes.
I appreciate that insight. And again, going back to your LinkedIn profile, as I was doing my research, I was noticing some of the posts you had made, and one you had referenced the link to, and I don't exactly know how to pronounce his last name, but I believe it's David Marquet, wrote the book Turn the Ship Around. So he was the commander of a nuclear submarine, and I was actually introduced to that book by a client of mine either late last year or very early this year, and it was it was incredibly insightful. I had what I call the aha moment. It's like, wow. And and so I appreciated that it resonated for you, because having a book like this that I could then share with my client and say, I would say, here's a book given talks about some of the topics you're struggling with. Have her read and then let's talk about it. Let's see, can this apply within some of the issues you're facing inside your organization? And I I've always been a sharer of documents and books, so totally appreciate you sharing that. How how does your leadership development training program, how does it differ from, especially when coming to team coaching, how does that differ from some of the other voices who are writing and practicing in this area? And again, I'm thinking back to the EMCC. There's some pretty big voices out there. And
Yeah.
so how does your program differ? And what are you seeing as the result of this training and your students going back into their organizations? What are they sharing with you?
Well, actually, that's what I'm doing analysis on right now. And it's quite convincing because, to start with the results, I use a mixed method when I've done the research in the program, the results of it, including learning reflections from the participant. I do observations, follow up with an interview. I've done a questionnaire with all their employees. And I analyzed running records and see if we can see if sick leave has decreased or productivity increased or whatever, depending on the organization. And in the questionnaire, I actually measure behaviors. So from the article that I shared with you before, this boss versus coach, from conventional to post-conventional leadership, there is a definition of 4 different kinds of leadership. The author, or let's say the boss, tells you what to do. The visionary, who actually tells you this is where we're going, or what's usually called transformational leadership. And then the democratic, and then the coaching leadership. So One of the 38 factors I measure is leadership in the meetings, or leader behaviors in meeting rather. And one of the first measures in the co-workers questionnaire related to how much the boss talk your meetings in general. From most of the time, the big part of the time, to being more democratic where the leader bounces ideas with the team. And the fourth alternative where the leader actively creates participation through asking questions to create co-creation that represents coaching leadership. In one of the organizations where we conducted this measurement, 53% of the respondents meant that their leaders used democratic and coaching leadership behaviors before the training program, but after the training. 95% of the respondents stated that their leaders were bouncing ideas and actually created participation. This meant that most of the leaders' behaviors were really improved according to the co-workers. I think that's a great result, and the outcome of the questionnaire corresponds very well with what the leaders who went through the leadership development training wrote in their own learning log. Or as one of the unit managers wrote, we have started to create real participation in our management team meetings. And this has spread down in the organization. We now see that people are taking initiative all through the organization. This might sound too good, but co-workers answers to the questionnaire of the leader's behavior together with what the leaders themselves write in the learning log. Say in interviews and what I've been able to see in observation, all this data corresponds. The leaders have been adopting much more of a coaching leadership approach in meetings, but also generally in the day-to-day communications. And we are at the moment writing an article where we are presenting a thorough review of what's needed to create an evidence-based leadership development training program related to both the content and the design, as well as the result of the program, which in fact also means that the program itself is evidence-based now. We are hoping to get this article published sometime after the summer.
Okay. I am curious in how this coaching approach and creating a participation, how does that, what have you seen in its effectiveness with an organization that's, let's just say, old, set in their ways? Maybe there's some little pockets of creativity. Their history may be totally of having a creative. That's how they got to where they are today. But it's still old. This is the way we've always done things. How do you introduce this dynamic of asking and participating? Getting insight others in a culture that just, as a whole, they're not there yet.
Well, sometimes it's like in these two organizations that we are met to now, actually, they are part of a big organization that is an old command and control culture.
Yeah.
Really. But I've been working with another unit in that organization for like from 15 to 18 or 14 to 18, something with 3 different groups. It made a difference. I have some documentation on that. But these 2 unit leaders from the more recently trained units, they saw that something happened in that unit. And they asked the training manager of that, "Have you done?" And they pointed to the program Coach to Lead. And I actually had one meeting with them. And then they ordered training for all managers. There were 19 or something in the 2 units. So that was an easy one. But in 1998 or 1999, I was running a workshop with an old traditional factory in Sweden. And I actually looked back to the documentation of that this week. And what I did that day was just asking questions.
Mhm.
And there's like 6 or 7 main questions that I ask, and then they sat down in small groups and they answered the questions, and they come to the conclusion that they need to ask people of their ideas.
Mhm.
And then in the end also the day we actually practiced, okay, what kind of questions are useful? But that was only one day workshop, and we were several different consultancies, coaching companies that were doing different things in the organization at the time. But I did hear that, but because this was a group coaching session, because
Mhm.
they were from different factories in the same company,
Right.
that they really got it somewhere. I'm no idea if my workshop was part of the change that happened, but as I did hear, they are getting it. I went back as a researcher a couple of years later, and what actually happened in the first year, they started at the motor drop where an engine puts in the chassis, and started asking people on that team, okay, do you have any ideas how we can simplify, improve, whatever, in this station? And that methodology spread all over the line
Mhm.
in 1 year, and because they saw the results of it, they spread to other factories in that company that are actually more or less a global company.
Mhm.
In the first year, they went from manufacturing 37 vehicles per day to 43.
Mhm.
That's 18.3% increase in productivity. At the same time, sick leave halved from 9% to 4.5%. And employee turnover went from around 30% to 6% in 1 year in one of the factories. That's a lot of money. And I
Yeah.
went back 11 years later or 10 years later, and the figures are even better. They were then actually turning out 80 vehicles per day,
Mhm.
and in the first comparison, it's the same amount of people working on the line, and they went from 43 to 80 vehicles per day by increasing the workforce from 800 to 1,100.
Mhm. Mm.
So the numbers they're convincing, and people who really look into the numbers, they see that wow, we need to do this. And I've done it with a lot of companies since then. But of course, most managers are stuck in their old ways and really don't. I mean, I thought they should open the doors long before I called them, but they think they know it, as we all do.
Right.
But
Yeah. So I'm curious then, they have a model. It's very much a coach approach. It's participating, having conversations. What has been the struggle, or how do you get around a workforce? Thinking about the auto plant that you were just talking about,
mm,
the individual on the assembly line, they're they're at the bottom. Ultimately, people are telling them what to do.
mm,
So how do you change within the structure of your program, help change their mindset so they're perhaps maybe trusting is the word that's coming to mind for me. How do I trust that I'm being asked to do being asked questions, it's not coming back, gonna come back and bite me, that my opinion matters. They may not take that at my opinion and run with it, but at least they're listening to me. How do you how do we build trust there So it's not just another, oh God, here comes the leaders coming up with something new.
Mm. Stick with it.
Okay.
That's a simple answer.
Okay.
And that was happened at that factory, actually. They were questioned. Everybody didn't trust them to really want the best for everyone. And some people were, mad and told her, and did what many do. But you paid to solve this. You're the manager, solve it.
Mhm.
So of course, there's a lot of obstruction and distrust and so forth. But
Mhm.
they stuck with it. Then they learned that maybe we should actually do some training for all employees in these lines. So they started to do that. And that's something that I do try to do with companies, but it's a matter of resources and so forth. But I mean, if the managers really, as they did in the beginning, they stuck with it, then it becomes contagious in a way. Because if people see that they are sticking with it, they start to do the same. So what I was seeing when I did my observations there is that team members on the line coach upwards. They don't see it as upwards because they went from seeing the organization as a pyramid to an upside down pyramid. And then when I was there 10 years later, they actually saw the teams as circles of stars.
You're like coaching each other, the teams.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I actually went there from 7 one morning to do my observation when the teams meet. And they work with lean. I've done all during this time. And I would say also there's some research on lean saying that it's not the methods, it's how we make decisions.
Mhm.
And how we make decision needs to be participative. So they meet in the morning, they follow up. Do we have any issues from yesterday we need to follow up on? Can we fix it ourselves and make their own decision straight there on the floor, or they send it to logistics or wherever? And actually, the management team meets on the floor 9 o'clock. This happens every day.
Mm.
And the information comes from the teams. The team leaders meet and spread the information where it needs to be. And there's some big boards where they show some numbers or issues, or there are issues sent to logistics or whatever. So
Okay.
it's really interesting to see that. And I was doing an observation at the logistics center, and suddenly the manager or the team leader comes out in the corridor and just ask 3 or 4 of the people working there, okay, we had this issue. Do we need to solve it now? Yes, that would be the best thing. Okay, what's the issue? What do we need to do? What alternatives do we have? In 5 minutes in the corridor, they had a team coaching conversation, fixing an operational problem, and then went back to work. So
A
really,
wonderful
really,
example.
yeah, I was so impressed
Yeah.
at that time.
How are organizations and their management, how are they enrolling into your Coach to Lead program? Is it a nomination process? They've heard about the work, they hear about the stories you just shared, and do they say, I want this for my organization, and then do they come to you? Are you, because from my perspective, everybody should be having a program like this here in even the US for that matter. So how are they coming to you, and how do you begin this work with them?
It differs, but I mean, I think the main source of new client organizations are old connections.
Okay.
Yeah, and some even come from my old um, sports school. They were training there, and now they're working somewhere else, and that's how I actually came into the units I was talking about that we are measuring now. Like, if I haven't seen this guy since late 80s, and he saw me on Facebook and connected, and I've seen what you've been writing about coaching and leadership. Could you come and talk to me and my training manager? And that's how that project started.
Okay.
And that was like 25 years later.
Mm. When you have a group of managers, single organization, multiple organizations come to you for training, what does that training look like? How long is it? What kind of commitment are they making?
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, because most leadership training programs are actually will not ever deliver, because they are not evidence-based. I mean, I have been saying that the content in itself is evidence-based. Design of the program is also evidence-based. And to actually get people to change and develop or improve their behaviors, we need a space training program. So, I mean, if I would deliver this 5 days in a row, I would guarantee that nothing will happen 2 weeks later.
Mm.
So I followed the research, and the space training means that I do a model every second week or third or fourth week, depending on. I can start with 2 models in a row to kick it off and get us really starting. And I've been actually in this research process, I've done 10 module programs. So the 2 units actually went to 10 whole day models for 10 months, because we did one each month around. But then I also done 4 programs with only 6 modules.
Mhm.
And actually, even the 6 modules have been in the last 2, and one I'm running now. I compressed them, so we actually do the program in 4 days, but with the same content. And that's just to pressure test it and see, okay, can we get the same results in a shorter time?
Okay. What do you do in the way of looking back and seeing how effective this program was? The the attendees are applying the principles and they're seeing results, whether it's 6 months after the program ended or a year, God willing, 5, 10 years. What's in place to measure that longevity and the stickiness of the program?
The longitudinal aspect of the questionnaire is also the reason why I can say something about the difference in perceived behaviors of the leaders, and that they improved from talking a lot through the meetings to bouncing ideas and actively creating participation. I think that's a really interesting and worthwhile outcome of a leader and leadership training program. The learning logs also represents a bit of a longitudinal perspective, as it takes some time for the program participants to get them done. And that's also on purpose, as I know it will take time. And even if a few of the participants sent in the learning reflections the same month we finished the program, most of them took 4 to 9 months to write the learning log, so they had time to practice and develop their coaching leadership skills after the 10 months of leadership training. And I also conducted observations and interviews and most of them were conducted 4 to 8 months after the program. So I can with confidence say that both the program and the research design with mixed methods, where we gather both qualitative and quantitative data, are more rigorous than most studies I've seen on leadership training.
As you take a step back and look at what you have created, what would be your, and we call this on Success Insight, the aha moment? What's been your aha moment? And I mean, this work that you have been doing, now you've got this this model and coach to lead. What has been your aha moment as you kind of take a look at what you've created?
Well, the aha moment has come through the interviews and through the observations. You know, when I see that they really are coaching, because when I do the observation that I call go and see coaching, and that I follow up first with a research interview and then a coaching conversation. At some of those during 2 decades, I almost get tear-eyed because the insights and what they're sharing and what I see they're doing, they are maybe because we do it for such a long time, really getting into it and understanding. And when they write in the learning slogs about asking open-ended questions, their insights are great.
Mhm.
So that's my most important aha moments. And
Okay.
especially when, I know that they have formulated in the strategic plan that we want to create the coaching culture in this company or organization. And they say it.
When they share that, it's a wonderful thing to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What final thoughts would you like to leave with our listening community, folks that are fans of coaching and consulting insights? What would you like to leave with them? Could be a quote, a book, an article, and we've got a couple articles that we're going to share for our listeners that you have provided. We have the links. But what would you like to or share as an insight for them before we head out today?
Well, I do have a favorite quote from he calls himself a pessimist consultant. But this quote, I just love it. It's never too late to give up.
Never too
It's
late.
quite optimistic.
Okay.
And because change is hard on many, and if we want change to happen in leadership or in other ways, it's never too late to give up. So let's stick with it.
Keep doing it. There's
Yeah.
You may not ever complete the task, but you can't abandon it. So
Yeah.
okay. Oh, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where would you like to send them right now?
Well, the best place to send them is to my website, coach2lead.se, and 2 with a number 2. But they can also find me on ResearchGate, where they can find my article, Boss versus Coach, from conventional to post-conventional leadership. And it's actually scoring very high there on number of reads. So, and there's of course lots of insights in that article, I think, at least. And the interest is growing for the article, and it's all about coaching leadership, and all the numbers and everything I've been telling you, not about the program in itself, because that's part of the next article. but the older studies and all numbers from them are all in that article in
Excellent.
English, because
No, that's excellent. I appreciate that they are in English, and I mean, to me, this is this interview is exciting because I mean, you know, in the work that I'm doing, I mean, I think there's a tendency perhaps we can get complacent in our approaches, and the work that I do now prompts me to continue learning more and more, and it's been wonderful. And so, from the podcast I did a couple of weeks ago to today, that helps me as a coach, helps me become a better coach that I can then turn around and help my clients. And so, I truly appreciate you spending the time with us today and sharing your vision and great work that you're doing. So, I look forward most definitely to staying in touch and continuing to learn more about your work in the future. So thank you, Po, for spending time with us today.
thank you for inviting me, and I really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Really good. That's maybe why coaching works, because people like to talk about their work.
There you go. There you go. Listen, stay on the line. We're going to do a very quick close, and you and I can have a final chat.
Okay.
All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Coaching and Consulting Insight series on the Success Insight podcast. We've just been chatting with Po Lindvall, Executive Master Coach, doctoral researcher, and we have been chatting about this coaching model, this leadership development training, and really moving from the top-down authority or democratic-based leadership to one where we are working together and asking questions and really in a place it's hard for some organizations because they're so used to being told what to do, and that's we have had to learn to lean in to behaviors that are a little different when somebody's asking us, well, what do we think? And this is good stuff. And if you have an interest in coaching, whether you're a practitioner like myself, like Po, or you are a manager or a supervisor in an organization that would benefit from work like this, make sure you let us know in the comments when you listen to this episode. You most definitely can reach out to myself or to Po on his website at coach2lead.se. And we're also going to provide a backlink to ResearchGate as well. So again, I hope you enjoy this episode. This was a little geeking out for me, so to speak, because I'm very much an evidence-based practitioner. This is an approach that resonated for me. And so the fact that I had met Po years ago back when we were at the conference in Istanbul, it was great to reconnect with him here on the podcast. Now, you can visit us at successinsightpodcast.com. That's where this episode will be presented. You can comment on it there as well. You can find us on LinkedIn and Facebook on our Success Insight podcast pages, where the episode is going to be up on YouTube. And of course, you can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we look forward to having you join us on a future episode of Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.